Now, I understand the fascination of wanting to know how the world around us works, and if humans didn't have that characteristic, then the world would definitely be a poorer place. However, when it comes to asking questions about the shape of the Earth, there's that much misinformation out there on the internet that it can be very easy for somebody to fall down a rabbit hole, and I hate to see that happen to anybody. Now, the subject of today's video has already made his mind up that the Earth is flat, and I hope I can change his mind. Now, he knows that I'm going to make this video and he's happy for me to do so as long as I shout out his channel name in the video. So let's let him introduce himself.
Hello and welcome to Seek Truth and Speak Truth.
Okay, so with that out of the way, everything I'm going to say in this video is directed specifically at you with your best interests at heart. And I hope you watch to the end, no matter how annoyed you get with me. I really want the opportunity to show you that the people that you are listening to are at best scientifically illiterate and at worst a little bit dishonest. So let's begin.
I really believe in the last sort of week or two, the ball has been killed. The ball is dead. Flat Earth is just winning. It's just the ball can't win now. There's just too much proof and only theory for the ball.
So straight off the bat, I think that is a major over-exaggeration. There is no serious institution in the world that takes Flat Earth seriously. I have never met a Flat Earther in person that I've not spoken to on the internet first, and I don't know anybody who has. So maybe when you say that, you mean you feel that the globe is dead to you, which is fair enough. But let's find out why.
Mr. Eric Dubay, the man, he recently done a video about the moon. It was a great video.
No, it was a rubbish video and a scientifically illiterate mess made by the same person who gave this as their explanation of how we get tides on the Earth.
Tides are caused by the gentle and gradual rise and fall of the Earth on the bosom of the mighty deep.
Now, unfortunately, Eric Dubay does have quite a sizable online presence that allows him to peddle his nonsense to quite a lot of people. And unfortunately, you are about to parrot quite a lot of it.
But basically, the moon cannot reflect sunlight the way that it should do, or it's not reflecting light the way it should do. I'm going to use my trusty spherical ball here. There's a spot, isn't there? I can't really put, there we go, a spot, a light spot. So anything that's a concave shape is going to have a light spot. It cannot signal the energy of the light in such a way that it would then bounce back to Earth and illuminate this whole ball. So, you know, if we looked at the moon and we saw a light spot like this, I would think to myself, oh, okay, yeah, it's the sun's reflection. I mean, that's basically what you're seeing here is the light bulb's reflection. And then obviously the light has travelled around and is reaching parts of this ball, and this side of the ball is dark. Lovely, yeah, you know, great, that's science. So why does the moon just illuminate completely, or obviously it's waxing and waning cycles? It's self-illuminating. And please explain to me why you think it's not when I've just proved it can't be.
Okay, so first of all, let's deal with that light spot that you mentioned. This is called a specular highlight. So this is caused when light reflects off smooth objects in a manner that we call specular reflection. However, not all objects that are a sphere will have a specular highlight. Just take a look at these rocks. You see, the moon is also a big sphere made out of rock, and surfaces like the rocky, dusty moon exhibit diffuse reflection. Now, let's also add that the scale of the ball, your lamp, and the distance between them is nothing like the sun and the moon. Place your football further away from the lamp and see how intense your specular highlight gets then. So there really is no reason at all that we should see any kind of specular highlight on the moon. It's a very, very common, dishonest, flat earth argument that literally has no substance when compared to the observations we make in the real world. And I'll refer you back to pictures like this, which is a much, much better example than your smooth, shiny football, which is very close to a lamp. So let's take a look at your second claim that the moon somehow gives off its own light. Well, back when I used to teach GCSE astronomy, one of the pieces of coursework we all had to do was take a telescope or a pair of binoculars with some kind of filter on and look at an area of the moon. And over a number of days or weeks, we'd have to sketch that area of the moon and see how the detail we could see changed. Now, one of the things we noticed as the Terminator line moved across the moon was a change in the length of the shadows in the craters we were observing. Now, If your claim is that the moon is giving off its own light, then how can these craters possibly have shadows? You see, this really is something that you can do for yourself. You can get yourself a telescope, you can get yourself a filter where you can look at the moon, and you can look at the craters, and you can look at how the detail changes from one night to the next as that Terminator line moves. And then ask yourself sincerely, when you can see those shadows in the crater, do you still believe that the moon is giving off its own light? Or is there a more appropriate explanation that it's just reflecting it from the sun?
The sun's rays heat and the moon's rays cool. And there's been many experiments proving this, where it's actually warmer in the shade during the evening, especially during full moons and things like that.
No, but let's start with what might be true. The light that we receive from the moon is going to be different than the light we receive from the sun. The sun will emit electromagnetic waves across a whole variety of wavelengths, and these wavelengths are reflected off the moon. And just like reflection anywhere, some of those wavelengths are going to be absorbed and some of those wavelengths are going to be reflected back. In fact, I think the peak intensity of wavelength of sun's light is about 550 nanometers, and the peak intensity of the light reflected from the moon is about 650 nanometers. So they are different. Now, if you look around me in the room behind me, I have one light bulb which is shining on all these objects, which is reflecting the same light, but it's reflecting back different wavelengths, which is why we see different colours. So yeah, the light that we get from the moon is going to be a little bit different than the light we get from the sun, but purely because it's reflected. But that is a million miles away from saying that the moon actually gives out cold light. Now, when you talk about these observations of objects in the shade being warmer than objects in the moonlight, that is because objects lose heat by a process called radiative cooling. Now, objects in the shade experience less radiative cooling than objects that are not in the shade. Even heavy cloud cover can cause this effect. Now, while I genuinely am happy to carry this conversation about moonlight on with you, this video really is about the shape of the Earth. So I'm just going to say this last bit and then we'll move on. Ask yourself, where in your life have you ever seen a light source that cools things down? How does that fit in with any of the experiences you've had from being a child to being an adult? Have you ever seen anything like that? Or are you listening to Eric Dubay and a handful of poor YouTube scientists and taking a huge leap of faith into something that makes no sense whatsoever?
But nobody really knows what the moon is because nobody's ever been there. No probes, nothing. Not anything has been there. So it is all hearsay and speculation, but we can look at facts.
And the facts are that we did land on the moon, and you just have a belief that we didn't. But again, the moon landing is the subject for another video. This is about the shape of the Earth. So let's move on.
And obviously the angles, sometimes you see these photos and the way the sun is, and say if it's a half moon, you know, the sun should be 90 degrees opposite it really for that half moon. Obviously depending on where you are on the Earth, it will look differently. But the sun's over here somewhere, you know, and the angles are wrong.
Right, so this is where it's going to get a little bit uncomfortable for you because I'm going to challenge your indoctrination from the flat Earth community. So let's have a little look at your moon phase argument. Now, I've got a feeling that when you're talking about the half moon, you're imagining a setup like this, where the observer here is going to see the sun and the moon at a 90-degree angle. But what we've got to remember is we're dealing with three-dimensional shapes, and it's very difficult sometimes to imagine and get your head around. But when a person is moving from one point on the Earth to another, their physical orientation changes, and that can make them observe the same half moon in the sky at what they might consider to be unpredictable angles. Now, this isn't the problem with the idea of the Earth being a globe. It's an inevitability of the Earth being a globe. Now, we also have to factor into the conversation that the moon, the Earth and the sun are not in a straight line. The Earth orbits the sun at an angle and the moon orbits the Earth at an angle, and sometimes the moon is above the Earth relative to the sun and sometimes it's below it. And all of these things combine together to produce these angles that you seem to find unpredictable. But let's have a look how ridiculous things actually get if we try and examine observations of the moon on a flat Earth. Right, here we have the flat Earth. And all the people on the flat Earth have the same orientation. This means that light from a distant moon will come in directly overhead for all observers. So every person on the planet would see the moon at exactly the same angle. But as you've said yourself, this isn't what we see. The moon can be seen at different angles at different times. So the flat Earth solution to this is to make the sun small and local and have it orbiting close to the Earth. But now look what happens. If we take the half moon you were talking about, this would mean that half of the Earth are looking at the side that's lit and half the Earth are looking at the side that's dark. In fact, on a flat Earth, where the moon moves in this fashion here, The people in the south would always be looking at a different side to the moon to the people in the north. Yet we know that on Earth, everybody is always looking at the same side of the moon, and you say that yourself in this very video. A small and local moon would have to travel in this path once every 24 hours for us all to be able to see it. Yet we all know that the moon phases take 29.5 days from start to finish. On a flat Earth, we would have to see all the moon phases in just one day. But of course we can get around those arguments by stopping the moon being small and local and putting it back at a distance. But that puts us back in the spot where the moon must be right ahead of every single observer on Earth. So how do we get rid of that problem? The Earth is a globe. Now, I'm going to ask you again to really think hard and to be honest with yourself. You're happy to use arguments about the position of the moon in the sky to try and debunk the heliocentric model. But think about the problems the moon will cause on a flat Earth. Why does everybody on the Earth see the same side of the moon, which would be impossible on a flat Earth? Unless we make that moon distant, in which case it would have to be literally overhead for every single person. How can you resolve what you see in the sky with the flat Earth model? Can you do it? And the answer is no, it is not possible because the Earth is not flat. Let's move on.
But gravity, you know, it needs to be there to hold this lie together. Gravity is the glue of the lie.
Well, no, nothing needs to be there. Gravity just happens to be there, and we've all really benefited as a result of it.
Apparently, the horizontal deflection due to gravity has been demonstrated. And this is, obviously, most people have heard of the Cavendish experiment. And there's another one, I can't even really pronounce it, the Schuylen experiment. That one was basically hanging, say, like a plumb bob or, you know, a weight next to a mountain. And the mountain drew in the weight. Okay, you know, did it, you know, why aren't we pulled into the side of the mountain? How does the mountain so suddenly overcome the mass of the whole Earth? Surely the mountain is part of the mass of the Earth.
Now, although widely repeated by flat earthers, this argument has to be, I think, one of the most single-handed, scientifically illiterate things that I have ever heard. Why would the mountain have to compete against the Earth? What exactly do you think is going on with the gravity there? We understand 100% that forces that act downwards act independently of forces that act to the side. This is an irrefutable fact of engineering. It's an irrefutable fact of physics. In fact, we often use questions like this at school to highlight what I'm talking about. So in this situation, we have a boat travelling horizontally across a river at a constant speed. Will the speed of the river flow affect the time that it takes the boat to cross? And the answer is no, it will not. And the reason the rate of the river flow won't affect the time it takes the boat to cross is because those two forces are acting at 90 degrees to each other. Now, next time you see a flat earther try and make this argument, I want you to do something. I want you to ask the flat earther what they actually mean. I want you to ask them to explain what they mean when they say the mountain can't outcompete the Earth. And what you'll get is no answer whatsoever. Maybe a lot of stuttering, and then some hand-wave dismissal or some ignorance, because these types of arguments have just become flat earth catchphrases with no substance behind them. There is nothing in physics, nothing in engineering that says that that little plumb bob hanging down next to the mountain has to be somehow caught in a battle between the earth below it and a mountain to the side of it. It's ridiculous.
It's not proof of gravity. Neither is the Cavendish experiment. Basically proves gravity is not real. There's so many variables involved. As soon as you hang something in an atmosphere, it's unmeasurable. You cannot trust the measurements made in these conditions. If you're hanging from a rope or a string or, you know, anything, like, usually things are made by twisting motion, you know, threads and things like that. So whatever you're hanging from, if it's heavy, it will twist. And whatever's opposite it will twist the opposite way, and they'll move together a little bit, won't they?
Now, I'm not really sure at this point what you think the Cavendish experiment actually is. What it isn't is somebody just hanging a bar with some balls on the end and hoping that it spins in the direction of two bigger balls put either side of them. It's not just about looking for movement and then saying, oh, we've got some movement, therefore gravity exists. Let me explain it in a bit more detail to you. First of all, it takes a very, very long time to get the equipment settled, but once it is settled, you can introduce the two big masses which are represented by the purple balls here. Now, as the two little masses are attracted to the big masses because of gravity, obviously that bar is going to start to spin, and we're going to measure that force on the wire. We're going to measure the torque on the wire as that bar in the middle starts to spin. Now, at the point that it stops spinning, the gravitational force is now matched by the torque on the wire. And then we plug all those numbers into this equation, the F being the force that we've just measured in the experiment, the M1 and the M2 being the masses that we've used, and the R squared being the distance between the centre of those masses. And that allows us to rearrange the equation to calculate big G, which is what we're looking for. But the problem flat earthers got is that when this is repeated thousands of times in universities all across the world, we are using different wires, different masses, different distances, but guess what? They are all still giving us the same value for G.
Now, the fact that we do get the same results for this experiment over and over and over and over again is highly significant, and it tells you that it can't be some sort of fluke. If somebody won the lottery every week for 50 weeks using exactly the same numbers, you wouldn't just say they got lucky. You'd start thinking that there was some reason those numbers kept coming up. And that is what we're seeing here. The reason is gravity. Why else? Are you really going to sit there and tell me that you think that we're getting these same results over and over and over again purely by chance? Think critically, not dismissively.
1958, I believe, Britannica Encyclopedia, and the entry about the Antarctica. And it states basically aeroplanes were flying 13,000 feet and hitting a dome.
Yeah, the Antarctic domes. This is Dome Argus, and I believe it's got the highest elevation of all of them. But I believe that the plane crash you're referring to happened to Dome C or Dome Charlie. It's got a few different names. And they're called domes.
Oh, I mean, I think it's Britannica. It's physical proof of a dome. And it's now being said, oh no, they're just ice shelves that we're hitting 2.4 miles up into the sky.
Now, at this point, we're just getting into the realms of wordplay. Similar to the flat earth argument about the horizon, where some flat earthers seem to think that horizon sounds a little bit like horizontal and it means something. You know, ultimately, nobody has ever said that they have crashed a plane into anything like a firmament. Simple as that.
Another thing I spotted today, a man was sued for $15,000 for claiming there was no curvature of the Earth. This was on a channel called Flat Earth Doctrine. I think the guy is called Zen Garcia. The trial was June the 11th, 2019 in Barrow County. And he won. It could not be proven that there was curvature.
So this flat earth story, just like flat earth science, again has been stretched out of all credibility. There was no court case that ruled there was no curvature. There was no court case that ruled curvature couldn't be measured. Zen Garcia offered, I believe it was £15,000 or $15,000 for somebody to carry out observations to fulfill a very specific set of criteria. Criteria, I believe, which would lead to the proof of 8 inch per mile squared. Now, the person who took him up on the challenge measured curvature, but he was sloppy and he didn't fulfill the exact criteria that Zen Garcia asked for. Now, the criteria itself was a little bit odd anyway, because the 8 inch per mile squared formula is actually not the correct formula for curvature. This is. And as you can see, this equation is a little bit complex. So boiling it down to 8 inch per mile squared is a common occurrence. But either way, to come out of that court case and claim that the court has ruled that there's no curvature or that curvature hasn't been measured is just a lie.
It's the end of the moon landings. Rather than use my trusty ball this time, I'm going to use my trusty head. That landing was within 15 degrees of the centre. There's a photo from the moon showing the horizon of the moon and then the Earth behind it. Lovely, 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 lovely. But we forget that this face of the moon is always facing the Earth. Always. So that bit there would always be facing Earth. You'd have to look up, straight up, 90 degrees, to be able to see the Earth from the moon.
So I believe that the photograph you're referring to is this one here, which was taken by the Apollo 11 spacecraft as it passed over Smythe Sea, or Smith Sea, and I'm going to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what the correct pronunciation of that part of the moon is. Anyway, that location is about here. Anyway, let's remind ourselves about why that picture is totally possible.
So we've already talked about three-dimensional spherical objects and how about changing your location on it changes your orientation. But we've also got to remember that as the moon orbits the Earth, sometimes it's above it and sometimes it's below it. Now, I personally don't own any modelling software, but you can download some and you can prove to yourself beyond doubt that there's absolutely nothing impossible with that picture. But let's go back to Allegedly Dave. One of my best performing videos is a review of a flat Earth debate Allegedly Dave did against a team of astrophysicists. And if you've got any energy left after watching this video, hop over and watch that one, because it will show you just what a train wreck of ideas Allegedly Dave actually has.
That's it. You know, the ball is dead. Flat Earth has won. So what you got? What you got to come back with?
Well, I'm glad you've asked, because you do seem to have given this area some thought, and I really do hope that I can give you some questions now which will give you even more thought and snap you out of this flat Earth rabbit hole before you get down too deep. Let's start with remembering what we talked about with the moon.
Remember, on a flat Earth, a distant sun means every single observer will see the sun directly overhead or at exactly the same angle in the sky from any given location. But a small and local moon on a flat Earth makes even less sense, because it makes it totally impossible for all observers from any location to be seeing the same side of the moon.
Now, be honest with yourself, do you really believe that our observations of the moon can be possible from a flat Earth? Does that really make sense to you? Now let's look at the sun. You see, you dismiss gravity as a force and you find it comical that people might believe in gravity. But for the sun to be small and local, it must move in a fashion like this on the flat Earth. And its path must expand and contract to account for the seasons at different times of the year. Otherwise, it will fail to explain the seasons at all. So given that you think gravity is so ridiculous, you now need to believe in this mysterious force instead, that doesn't even have its own version of the Cavendish experiment to back it up. It has nothing. It's an unexplainable magic force that's going to keep the sun going around in circles, causing these circles to expand and contract as time goes on. Now, as fellow YouTuber Professor Dave Explains pointed out in one of his recent videos, as the seasons change, the circumference of the path that the sun is taking also changes, which means the distance it's got to travel is also changing. So to keep a day length to 24 hours, the sun now also needs to be changing its speed constantly. Now, you claim to be critically thinking enough to laugh at gravity and dismiss it. Are you seriously going to tell me that you accept something like that has absolutely no evidence just because Eric Dubé says so? Let's look at the sun a bit more. So on a flat Earth, just like the moon, observers must see different sides of the sun. Yet you can be in any location on the Earth, and using a solar filter you will always see the same formation of sunspots on the sun to any other observer in any other location on the planet
At that specific point in time.
Now, these sunspots also move, and you can watch them move. They take about 24 days to rotate around the sun at the equator and a bit longer at the poles. So this means that observers in the south should see different sunspots than observers in the north, but they don't. Now, if you really want to take your research into flat Earth seriously, then do some research. Get yourself a solar telescope or a solar filter and observe the sun and observe the sunspots. Find yourself on the internet a flat earther from the southern hemisphere and get them to do the same. And you will see that you are looking, again, at exactly the same side of the sun. Just like the moon, how can we possibly explain our observations of the sun using this model? So let's forget about the sun and just talk about the stars. On a flat Earth, south means this. Looking south on a flat Earth means observers in 3 different locations can all be looking south, but be looking in completely different directions. However, when you go to the southern hemisphere and you look south, no matter where you are in the south, you always see the same stars circling the southern celestial pole like this. You see, that doesn't make any sense at all, does it? How can you look in opposite directions yet still be looking at the same stars? And come to think of it, how do we have these 2 celestial points in the sky anyway? One that we can see from the north and one that we can see from the south, that both rotate in opposite directions. How is that possible on a flat Earth? How can we see pictures like this showing that the sun is lighting up the clouds from underneath on a flat Earth? Surely only curvature and a sun setting below the horizon can explain this. And if there is no curvature, how are you going to explain that the sun is suddenly dropping in altitude below the clouds? Does that make any sense to you whatsoever? Now, flat Earth can't explain any of those very simple things, nor can it explain objects vanishing from the bottom up. Now, they may try and say the word perspective, but when you ask them to explain it, all you're going to get is stuttering, because they can't explain it. Yet all of these problems are solved by one simple solution: a globe Earth orbiting the sun. Now, if you don't believe in gravity, tell me, why do objects fall down? If you're going to give me the argument that they fall down because they're denser than the air around them, well, look at the air around any object and it's less dense above than it is below. So why does density make the object move downwards into the more dense medium? Why doesn't the object fly upwards? Now, I could go on and on and on, but that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to give you just a few things that you can take away and really think about and try and digest. Because you do seem to me like the type of person that wants to think about observations they make and how they reflect upon the shape of the Earth that we're stood on. Now, if you think about everything I've said and you handwave dismiss it all and you're not interested, then good luck on your journey, and I'm sorry that I couldn't help you. But if you've got any questions about what I've said, or you at least want to engage in the dialogue a little bit further and look at both sides instead of just listening to Eric Debay videos or Flat Earth videos on YouTube, then feel free to get in touch and we can do this live online, we can do it in private offline, we can do it whatever. All right, all I want is the best for you, so good luck. But before I go, just one more thing.
Let's look at predicting the weather. The weather is predicted by meteorologists who use satellite imagery of a globe to do it. No meteorologist on the planet has any idea how to predict the weather on a flat Earth. They don't know how it's done. But if the Earth is flat, that means somebody has figured out how we predict the weather, because we do predict the weather. But then they've also managed to infiltrate every single company in the world that has anything to do with predicting the weather. However, the people that work in those companies have no idea that this is happening, because all the software and all the ideas that they're using are based on a globe model. Amongst many other things, seismologists can accurately locate the epicenter of an earthquake. But they have no idea how to do that on a flat Earth, because they use a globe Earth model and the movement of seismic waves through a globe Earth to make those predictions. But they do find those epicenters. They can do it. So if the Earth is flat, that means that somebody has figured out how to predict the epicenter of an earthquake on a flat Earth and then infiltrated all the independent seismologists across the entire world, and then somehow brainwashed them into thinking that the calculations they are doing are actually based on a globe model, when in reality they're based on this secret science on how to find an epicenter of an earthquake on a flat Earth. The most efficient flight path from one country to another is calculated independently by independent airlines all over the world, and they use a globe model to do it. However, if the Earth is flat, what that actually means is somebody has cracked the idea of how to calculate these most efficient flight paths based on a flat Earth, and then somehow infiltrated all these independent companies all across the world and brainwash the people doing these calculations to make them believe that they're doing these calculations based on a globe model. On planet Earth, there are literally thousands of independent companies that send radio signals and TV signals. And they all seem to be under the impression that when they send their signals, if they send them in a straight line, they don't really travel much further than 40 miles because the curvature of the Earth is in the way. So they have to use frequencies which will bounce off the ionosphere and allow those signals to travel further around the curvature of the Earth. Now, if the Earth is flat, what that means is somebody has broken the laws of physics and somehow stopped these TV companies sending signals further than 40 miles, but then infiltrated their equipment to allow the signals that they send off the ionosphere to travel much further. This is an equatorial mount. You can use it to track the sun as it moves across the sky. However, the people that design the equatorial mount and sell them independently to make money for themselves and their families have designed the equatorial mount based on a globe Earth. The equatorial mount itself cannot physically rotate in the way that's needed for it to track the sun over a flat Earth. So if the Earth is flat, what that means is some flat earther has been able to infiltrate all the equatorial mounts on the planet and somehow adjust them slightly so the designers of them can't notice those adjustments, but now they do work and track the sun on a flat Earth. This is a TARDIS. It allows a user to travel through space and time. And if the Earth is flat, then the people organising the conspiracy must own a TARDIS. And the reason for that is any kind of conspiracy to hide the true shape of the Earth must have been hundreds of years in the making, meaning that this conspiracy was well underway when there was no emails, when there was no mobile phones, when communication between different countries was almost impossible. And yet somehow the people behind this conspiracy to hide the shape of the Earth were simultaneously at that time manipulating people across the entire plane, and somehow ensuring that all these different populations reach the same false conclusion.
Anyway, if you do feel that I've come across patronising towards you in this video, then I do apologise, it's not my intention. But it's very, very easy to be patronising towards flat earth ideas because, well, you know, good luck.